What if I told you the truth about attraction, emotions, and hidden intentions isn't spoken, it's shown? Welcome to Woman's Secret Signals, the channel where we decode what's really going on beneath the surface. Not what people say, but what their behavior quietly reveals. Because here's the reality most people ignore. Women rarely express everything directly. Not because they're trying to confuse you, but because emotions, psychology, and instinct don't always come out in words. They come out in signals. The way she looks at you, the way her energy shifts, the small changes in attention, tone, and behavior that most people miss. But you won't. On this channel, you're going to learn how to read between the lines, to understand attraction, detachment, interest, and even deception, without guessing, without overthinking, and without being played. Whether it's love, dating, or relationships, we break it down using real psychology, real patterns, and real life situations. So if you've ever felt like something was off, if you've ever been confused by mixed signals, or if you just want to understand women on a deeper level, you're in the right place. Subscribe now because once you start seeing these signals, you can't unsee them. Let's start with something important. Not every change in behavior means someone is cheating. Relationships naturally evolve and people go through phases. But sometimes there's a subtle shift, a feeling you can't quite explain, that something isn't the same anymore. In female psychology, emotional connection plays a huge role. Women, in general, tend to invest deeply in emotional intimacy. So when that connection starts to fade or redirect elsewhere, it often shows in small but noticeable ways before anything else becomes obvious. The first sign to watch for is a sudden emotional distance. This doesn't always come in the form of arguments or conflict. In fact, it's often the opposite. She may seem calmer, quieter, or less reactive than usual. Topics that once sparked deep conversations now feel surface level. Where she once shared her thoughts, feelings, and daily experiences openly, she may now hold back or give short, disconnected responses. You might notice that she's no longer as interested in spending quality time together. Plans feel more like obligations than excitement. Conversations lose depth. Eye contact becomes less frequent. It's not hostility, it's detachment. Why does this happen? From a psychological perspective, when a woman begins to emotionally invest in someone else, her mental and emotional energy shifts. She may not even be fully aware of it at first. But subconsciously, she starts creating distance to justify or manage her internal conflict. This is important. Emotional withdrawal often comes before physical betrayal, not after. Another subtle clue is intuition. Many people ignore their gut feeling because they don't have proof. But human intuition is often built on picking up micro behaviors, tone changes, body language, patterns that we consciously overlook. However, don't jump to conclusions. Emotional distance can also come from stress, personal struggles, or unresolved issues within the relationship. The key here is awareness, not accusation. In the next section, we'll talk about a more visible shift, changes in behavior and routine that can reveal even more about what's really going on beneath the surface. Now let's move into a more visible and often confusing sign, unexpected changes in her routine and appearance. Again, change in itself is not a bad thing. People grow, evolve, and sometimes decide to improve themselves, whether it's fitness, style, or social life. But the key difference lies in how sudden, secretive, and unshared these changes become. One major sign is a shift in daily habits. If she suddenly starts going out more often without clearly explaining where or with whom, that's something to notice. Maybe she used to tell you about her plans naturally, but now her responses become vague, just meeting friends, or it's nothing, don't worry about it. There's a lack of detail where there used to be openness. Her schedule might also become inconsistent. She may start coming home later than usual, or her availability changes in ways that don't quite add up. When you ask about it, her answers might feel rehearsed, defensive, or overly casual, as if she's trying to normalize something unusual. Another strong indicator is a sudden focus on appearance, but with a twist. It's not just that she wants to look better, it's who she seems to be looking better for. If she's putting an extra effort before going out without you, wearing new styles that don't align with her usual taste, or paying more attention to details she previously didn't prioritize, it could signal that she's trying to impress someone new. In female psychology, attraction often involves emotional and mental stimulation. When a woman becomes interested in someone else, she may subconsciously start presenting a more ideal version of herself, more polished, more intentional. You might also notice she becomes more protective of her time. Plans with you may feel less important, while outside activities suddenly become a priority. But here's where balance matters. Self-improvement is healthy. Independence is healthy. The red flag appears when these changes come with secrecy, defensiveness, and emotional distance combined. One sign alone doesn't mean anything, but patterns do. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into something even more telling: changes in communication, especially when honesty starts to fade. Now let's talk about one of the most revealing signs: how communication begins to change. In any healthy relationship, communication is the foundation. It's how trust is built, maintained, and strengthened. So when communication patterns shift in unusual ways, it often points to something deeper going on beneath the surface. One of the clearest signs is increased secrecy, especially around her phone and personal space. If she suddenly becomes overly protective of her phone, turning it face down, taking it everywhere, even to places she never used to, like the bathroom, or reacting quickly when notifications pop up, that's a noticeable behavioral change. It's not about privacy alone, it's about a new level of guarded behavior that wasn't there before. You might also notice she starts changing passwords, logging out of accounts around you, or avoiding using her phone openly in your presence. Again, privacy is normal, but when it becomes secretive and defensive, it can signal that she's hiding conversations or interactions she doesn't want you to see. Another major shift happens in the way she talks to you. Conversations may become shorter, less engaging, and sometimes even forced. Where she once showed curiosity about your day, she might now seem distracted or uninterested. Responses feel delayed, not just in texting, but emotionally. It's like she's there physically, but mentally somewhere else. There's also something called inconsistent communication. For example, she may ignore your messages for long periods, then suddenly respond with normal or overly sweet energy, almost like she's trying to balance something out. This emotional inconsistency can be confusing, leaving you questioning whether you're overthinking or not. In female psychology, when emotional attention shifts to someone else, communication with a partner can start to feel like a responsibility rather than a desire. That's when effort decreases and inconsistency increases. Another subtle sign is defensiveness. If simple questions like, "Where were you?" or "Who were you with?" start triggering strong or disproportionate reactions, it may be because those questions touch on something she doesn't want to explain. Instead of answering calmly, she may flip the situation, accuse you of not trusting her, or avoid the topic completely. But remember, context matters. Stress, personal issues, or even feeling controlled can also cause similar reactions. The key is recognizing patterns, not isolated incidents. In the next section, we'll explore a deeper emotional layer: how guilt, projection, and behavior shifts can reveal what words often try to hide. Now we move into a deeper and more psychological sign: how guilt and internal conflicts start to show up in behavior. When someone is doing something they know could hurt their partner, it often creates an internal emotional imbalance. And instead of directly admitting it, that tension tends to leak out in indirect ways, through mood changes, reactions, and subtle behavioral shifts. One of the most powerful signs here is projection. Projection is when someone shifts their own actions or feelings onto you. For example, she might start accusing you of being distant, unfaithful, or dishonest, even when you haven't given a reason for those accusations. This can be confusing because it feels like the problem is suddenly coming from your side. From a psychological standpoint, this happens because it helps reduce guilt. By focusing on your faults, she avoids confronting her own behavior. It's a defense mechanism, not always conscious, but very telling when it becomes a pattern. Another key sign is unusual mood swings. You may notice that her emotional responses become unpredictable. Some days she might be overly kind, affectionate, and attentive, almost like everything is perfect. Then suddenly, without a clear reason, she becomes irritated, distant, or cold. This emotional inconsistency often reflects inner conflict. On one hand, there may be guilt or attachment to the relationship. On the other, there's involvement or interest elsewhere. That internal push and pull can create unstable behavior externally. There's also something called overcompensation. Sometimes, instead of pulling away, she may temporarily become extra loving, giving more attention, more compliments, or more physical affection than usual. This can feel positive on the surface, but if it appears suddenly and doesn't feel natural, it might be an attempt to ease guilt or maintain balance. Another subtle shift is avoidance of deeper conversations. If topics about the future, commitment, or the relationship itself start getting brushed off, delayed, or redirected, it can signal that she's unsure or emotionally divided. Talking about long-term plans may feel uncomfortable if her feelings are no longer fully aligned. It's important to understand that human behavior under guilt is rarely stable or consistent. That's why these signs often appear as contradictions rather than clear, direct actions. But again, none of these signs alone confirm anything. They simply raise awareness of patterns that shouldn't be ignored. In the final section, we'll bring everything together and talk about what you should actually do if you start noticing these signs, because how you respond matters more than anything else. Now that we've gone through the signs, let's talk about the most important part, what you should actually do if you start noticing these patterns. First, don't panic and don't jump to conclusions. It's very easy to connect a few dots and assume the worst. But relationships are complex and behavior can change for many reasons: stress, personal struggles, emotional burnout, or even issues within the relationship itself. Acting purely on suspicion can damage trust faster than anything else. Instead, focus on observation over accusation. Pay attention to patterns, not isolated incidents. One bad day, one late reply, or one mood swing doesn't mean anything on its own. But consistent changes across emotional connection, communication, and behavior, that's when it becomes something worth addressing. The next step is calm, direct communication. Choose the right moment, not during an argument, not when emotions are high. Speak honestly, but without blame. For example, instead of saying, "You're acting suspicious," you could say, "I've been feeling a bit disconnected lately, and I want to understand what's going on between us." This approach opens the door for honesty instead of defensiveness. Also, be prepared for different outcomes. She might open up and explain things that have nothing to do with cheating. Maybe she's dealing with stress, emotional confusion, or unmet needs in the relationship. Or there may be something more serious that needs to be addressed. Either way, your goal is clarity, not control. Another important point: respect yourself. If patterns continue, if honesty is missing, or if trust keeps breaking down, you have to ask yourself whether the relationship is still healthy for you. Ignoring red flags doesn't fix them, it only delays the outcome. At the same time, avoid becoming obsessive or invasive. Checking phones, spying, or constantly testing your partner will only create more damage, regardless of the truth. Healthy relationships are built on mutual trust, transparency, and emotional safety from both sides. In the end, these signs are not about proving someone is cheating. They're about recognizing when something isn't right and having the courage to address it in a mature, grounded way. Because the strongest position you can be in is not knowing everything. It's knowing how to respond wisely when something feels off.